or good afternoon from wherever you may be joining us. As both Peter and Nat said, I'm Jennifer Jones, and I'll be facilitating this discussion about consciousness and the law related to contemplative lawyering. And first, I'd like to thank the organizers and the facilitators at PIES-Lab and the Conscious Lawyer for the invitation and their encouragement. Both are such special organizations. So Elaine and Peter and Annette, thank you very much for inviting me this morning here, or today, we'll put it that way. So we've already introduced ourselves, a little bit about me. I'm a Texas native, but I live here in Denver, Colorado. I moved here from New Orleans, and I'm a civil rights attorney and a clinical instructor at a law school here in Denver. I also founded Levitate, a brand new spiritual lifestyle company, which is in a little slow march towards launching. But this talk will be based on my article in The Conscious Lawyer, as was stated, and it's gorgeous and it's a thoughtful edition. And the article is entitled Contemplative Lawyering, a Vocation of Service. This talk is entitled Consciousness and the Law in Contemplative Lawyering. The discussion will address contemplative means as a means of conscious lawyering, particularly in a time of social change. The discussion will also explore conscious sacred resistance and specifically joy as a means of resistance. It will also be based on a published article in The Conscious Lawyer, which was called Conscious Sacred Resistance, If We Will But Do It. For so many reasons, I think this talk is so important at this moment. I really do. And as lawyers and legal workers, where are we? Where are we? We are in a time of deep social change. And of course, the pandemic, which seems to be getting a little bit worse, some would call it chaos. But we are also in a profession that at times can ignore the consciousness that can help bring about positive and affirmative change, if not completely undermine it. But we are gatekeepers to a legal system that at some times has contributed to gross injustices that we all know, and I don't need to get into here. Sometimes we forget that many of our laws, particularly here in the United States, were in fact actively intended to exclude most of us here for one reason or another. And then we sometimes wonder why that same system has failed us so deeply. So generally, the practice of law is very dualistic and adversarial, and it ignores many ancient practices like contemplation, non-dualism, and meditation. And despite overwhelming now Western science that demonstrates their benefits. And in particular, our professional practice as lawyers can become very limited and personally can lead to burnout, exhaustion, compassion fatigue for those of us who are people's lawyers especially, cynicism, and a host of other problems, which leads to a really substantial number of otherwise competent professionals leaving the professions. I was reading a piece in The Atlantic by Lee Abramson, and she said that the legal profession is the only profession at this time that actually has a system set up or a sub-profession to help people get out of the legal profession. And it was a very great article, and it resonated with me and kind of goes to our point today. And this is one reason for this is because the American legal system is characterized by reason, procedure, outcome, reaction, and technicality, rather than universal truth. For our purposes here today, universal truth can be defined in a number of ways and called by many, many names, religious and otherwise. But for purposes, it is the reality behind our existence, beyond the three-dimensional plane, the very fabric of our universe, which can be articulated by human beings in numerous ways. Like I said, all religions and no religions, some call it the perennial tradition, other people call it love or consciousness. And it is this love or consciousness from which a conscious lawyer may practice. It is from this place that we can provide legal work and representation from a place of consciousness, the ground of being. It is a prophetic orientation, and it involves engendering social change from an infinite reserve. I was listening to a talk by Marianne Williams, and she said, quoting Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she said that burnout is actually impossible when you're coming from this sort of exhaustible place. And this is so needed at this time from lawyers, from all professions, from all walks of life. And contemplative lawyering seeks to dismantle a system of evil by invoking the practices and principles of universal truths, which supersede law, pulling from the energetic fields of consciousness or soul force, as so many people are familiar with. As legal workers, we are in a unique position as gatekeepers of our Constitution or organizing documents to bear witness to what is happening. But first, we have to see it. I've recommended for viewing Terrence Malick's film, A Hidden Life. And we see the story of Jagerstatter, a simple farmer, an ordinary man in the rural areas who stood with conviction as a conscientious objector against the Nazis and was executed for it. Everyone, all the authorities that be, his lawyer, the church, his community, told him that his stand would not matter. But yet here we are today, and all of you are here today, which gives me a lot of hope and is inspiring. The same with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who stood as a religious conscientious objector against the Nazi regime in Germany. And he also was executed as a result, just 2 weeks before US troops liberated the camp where he was held. In 1932, Bonhoeffer delivered a sermon. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on thee. And his orientation obviously was Christian at that time. As Bonhoeffer and his parishioners witnessed the rise of the fascist Nazi regime in Germany, he urged that in times of chaos and worldly turmoil, that we take a steadfast inner posture that yields to the permanent universal principles for active co-creative answers. He said, and this has some Christological terminology, but it's not biased one way or the other. These are the words of Reverend Bonhoeffer. He says, even if this world is smashed into pieces, we look to you not as those who know, after all, what they should do, but as those who do not know what they should do. And we go home to our workers, civil servants, merchants, students, pastors, back to our work in which we do not know what to do. But we know our work takes place under universal truth. We cannot stand still, and we must go forward. We must not put our hands in our laps and rest up until God, he says God, does his. Our eyes are on you, on the ground, our homeland, on the land of your firm commandment. For his part, Bonhoeffer, influenced by the gospel of social justice when he came to the United States while attending Union Theological Seminary, by the courage of his convictions, left the United States knowing what he would face in his resistance, and as I said, was later executed for that resistance. Because right now, in my view, evil, particularly systemic and institutional evil, is very conspicuous at this time. But it is loud and it is dying. It is coming up for a collective recognition and for healing. But some days evil doesn't seem like it's ending, and it seems to be growing and doing quite well and have a great audience. But as we are also seeing, evil, particularly deep systemic evil, always destroys and caves in on itself. This is my belief. So love has the last word. And we will talk a little bit later about how joy can be a form of resistance and source of comfort when it really does seem like evil is winning. Father Rohr, the founder of the Center for Action and Contemplation, in his book, What Would You Do with Evil, says in empire, which is representative of the dominant system for our purposes today, he says that evil often appears benign and is seldom challenged because most of us benefit, despite varying degrees, not everyone benefits, from systemic evil. In the book, Rohr mentions some characteristics of evil. Surprisingly, that evil is typically agreed upon as good and necessary. It is even given a pass, and we often think that we need it. It often involves the I rather than the we as the reference point. Evil is usually deemed good before it shows itself as bad. For instance, evil is not always the most obvious, like how we all saw the murder of George Floyd in broad daylight. We know that before that moment, though, scores of silent and complicit wrongdoings and systemic forms of evil had to have occurred. Kind of bad apple ideas, the concept of law and order, lack of civilian oversight as practical examples, but also the silent complicities that has led to the indignities which allowed these sort of ideas to take form in the shape of policies, anemic policies. Father Rohr also says to think that we can totally resist and avoid evil is to persist in it in a new form. In other words, denial or complicity. And most relevantly for our purposes today, that there is no way for educated and thinking people to ever have a logical or satisfying answer to the problem of evil. So this can often lead to cynicism, and which touches on a little bit what I spoke about in the legal profession, burnout. It can also cause scapegoating, blame, and what he calls radical egocentricity, which is the I as the reference point. I spend a lot of time with people who are paid to think, right? And think and think and think. And especially at this time, you can think and think for hours and days and months and plan. And there is still no solution. And I find that in my practice as a lawyer, that it has been beneficial for me, especially at this time, to yield to the presence of consciousness and to be contemplative during this time. But as a panacea, Rohr urges that an inner posture of contemplation to inform outward action and activism is important. This is because contemplation can facilitate a state of grace, love, and mercy. So I'm sure you all read, but he said this quote, and I love it so much. He says, too much activism without enough inner work, insight, or examination of conscience inevitably leads to violence, to self, to the project at hand, and invariably to others. Too much inner focus risks narcissism and individualism. Too much outer focus risks superficiality and negativity, passing for love, and various messiahs complexes. Those on the right can lack love, they just wear two different disguises. And those on the left can lack love. We need both inner communion and outer service. So speaking of service, it is the harnessing of true power which can act as a catalyst for consciousness in action. That's what service can do for us. In the article, I reference this harnessing of true power as circular power, this shared force, which is not bottom up because it's self-regenerative. And in traditional practice, the law as we know it can be very hierarchical. So in the 20th and 20th century West, this is also often called servant leadership. Though it's an ancient concept, this term was coined by Robert Greenleaf and charges the traditional leader as a servile leader, one who is servant first, by prioritizing the needs of others, especially the most vulnerable. This has been most notably practiced by Gordon Cosby and his network. He's now deceased, and the network of the Church of the Saviors and all the things that he has, or they have. These networks have even established a servant leadership school, and that's how strongly they believe in the idea of servant leadership. And interestingly, as I was preparing for this, I found that Gordon Cosby gave a sermon in 2008 when the Great Recession was first beginning. There was war, there still is war, but when it was such a dark time for the United States. And his sermon was based, or his talk was based on Bonhoeffer's talk, "We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." And he said, "We're the ones who in you and under you are showing up, and we would keep our eyes on you," and whatever that means for you, whether it's consciousness or whatever it may be. Liberation theories can inform and heavily intersect with the practice of servant leadership. And that is demonstrated a lot by the work of the late James Cone. And he was very hard on those who have spirituality and faith, and saying that those who are spiritual and those who are people of faith can't be neutral in times of oppression and chaos. With that said, I will talk about joy. I have to confess that I didn't really know how to come to this conference and talk about joy with all that has happened just these few days. And I suspect that each of you, like me, is watching all that's happening in our nation and world, and also have had to personally face emotional and very concrete challenges during this pandemic. It is hard. I mean, it is truly hard. I thought about nixing actually this conversation about joy after asking to talk about it, because I just didn't know how I could authentically come to it. And last night I received just a heartwarming message from a student. And I was sitting there and working. It was late at night, and it was just so encouraging and so insightful. And I knew that I couldn't negate to come here and talk about joy and avoid that. I could not do that. At this moment, of which we're all a part, it has called us in many ways, as I said, to be vigilantly resistant. And the practice of joy can be a practice of sacred resistance. It is said joy is an active resistance against all the forces of despair, which can be a state or a way of life, making a productive use of pain and suffering, not to take them lightly, but to in fact take them seriously. And it's counterintuitive in that regard. And when we are all joyful together and we hold a presence of joy, it can form a womb of joy. And this is because joy and hope are positively affirming and energizing words, and can help to inoculate us from the cynicism and narcissism that we talked about earlier. The benefit to holding on to joy is that it's non-dualistic. One can be joyful, yet sad. One can be joyful, yet disappointed. One can be joyful, yet oppressed. There are so many scholars and spiritual, religious, and otherwise who have theorized about the nature of joy, particularly in the face of enormous turmoil and oppression. Jürgen Moltmann, Willie Jennings, and Dr. Barbara Holmes. if you'd like to check out their work, or if you haven't seen it already or read it. And I mentioned Dr. Holmes because she's written the acclaimed Joy Unspeakable, but also because Dr. Holmes is an attorney, and she has moved her practice now entirely to the intersection of spirituality, religion, and cultural studies. And she theorizes about contemplative practices, joy, cosmology, and mysticism. And it's so important in terms of our spiritual thought right now and our cultural bearing. But how can joy be cultivated? Dr. Willie Jennings says joy can be cultivated by singing a song in a strange land, to laugh, to learn from those who live through conditions set up where people who have learned to ride the winds of chaos teach us, and a willingness to want to hold on to life. He calls joy currency. And to maintain that song of universal truth, and I see so many people out here doing that on the streets and in their protests and their resistance. It's a song rooted in another dimension. It's simply a refusal to accept the things as they are. And to that end, where can we cultivate spaces for joy? Although joy is infinite, we should cultivate spaces for joy. And at this time of great isolation, finding and identifying and maintaining those spaces in our homes is so very important, since so many of us can't go to our yoga studios or meditation places or church or wherever it is that you go to find joy and have community. I think that having it there, for me, it's been really important, because I need to be in a space, some kind of area other than myself, because working from home, it's like, there's me, need to get away. So having a semblance of joyful community at this point, where physical communion is so challenging, is important. So if there's room, I recommend setting up some sort of physical space, or it can be a space for music or arts or yoga, indoor gardening I've gotten into myself. It's been pretty relaxing. But the purpose of this is not to relax and find comfort, albeit that's important, but rather to cultivate an inner sense of joy, to act, to affect the lives of other people, and hopefully our world. Like true power, joy is infectious and a regenerative force. There's so much going on right now, but spiritual contemplative practices can be our trusted anchor in times of chaos and uncertainty, and a vehicle for joy so that we can act from a place of consciousness. Because this really, really is our time, if we will but do it. Our contemplative actions will reverberate through generations. I hope we hold this light, not only for ourselves, but for our nation and our world. And I thank you all for listening to me today. Any questions? Thank you. Thank you.
So much, Jennifer. It's like Carrie raised her hand. Go ahead, Carrie.
Oh, I was just clapping.
Oh, I see. Yes, yes.
Peter? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. Yeah.
I would be interested in what the students said to you last night on the phone that re-elevated you. Maybe that's the way to put it. And let me say the context for my asking that. I experienced so much of life caught up in the in an unconscious isolation, very much affected by the news, by events, by things to get done, many of them full of conflict. And it's hard to be reconnected to this thing that I keep forgetting, which you're talking about, which is the uplifting of the spirit when it occurs, and the way that can fill out your entire being as it enters you, and then of course it becomes something of a force for transmitting it to others. I wondered about that interaction with the student and how that did that for you.
It was definitely emotional and transformative, and I was even getting emotional talking about it. It's certainly, just as we're all lawyers here as an wizard, it's not a reflection on the University of Denver. But this particular student is one who had been bullied to the point of needing to pull folks in authority. And we're getting some traction on that, and had a hard day yesterday, and was thanking me for my instruction and support, and said, I thank you, and I see you, and thank you for seeing me.
Mhm.
And that just kind of put me in this place I needed to be.
Mhm. So behind the roles and normal interactions or routinized interactions, you saw each other. He
Yes,
or she was able to affirm that sight of your being and who you really are and what your essence is and your intention is. And it restored it in yourself to see it so recognized.
absolutely, because I was definitely feeling a bit discouraged working in civil rights and trying to train future civil rights lawyers, to be frank, and then having this sort of thing happen. You just say, what am I doing? And it gave me, yes, we saw each other.
Mhm.
I have an observation that's related. I took a class at the University of Minnesota Law School. I'm an adjunct there. And lawyers as peacemakers, which includes a part of the course is mindfulness practice. And I asked the students to keep a journal of their daily mindfulness practices. And then I review them periodically just to see how they're doing and see if I have any suggestions or anything. And I just finished reading 15 of them. It's frankly really, really discouraging. The anxiety, the uncertainty, and I feel so, first of all, I feel so hopeful that at least I'm able to offer them some practical contemplative practices that can be of use to them. I don't know what the interior life is like of practicing lawyers. I suspect it's quite similar. And I don't know, the isolation Peter's talking about, the stress and anxiety, everything's a performance. Stu Webb, the founder of Collaborative Law, talked to our class on Tuesday night, and he said that lawyers are always performing for their clients. They want to show them what they can do for them, which usually means negativity,
Right.
as opposed to holding a higher consciousness and bringing their clients up to where they are. So I think the only answer I know of to all this negativity I'm sharing with you is contemplative practices. And Jennifer, I bless you for spreading this message and the power of what contemplation can do and what the power that we have if we act from our higher consciousness. So thank you.
Thank you, and it's very encouraging to hear about the mindful practices in your class. It's wonderful. Let's see.
We had Tair and then Duncan.
Okay.
Tair, you want to?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm really moved by everything you said. So thank you for doing this work and really clearly synthesizing and organizing the power of being contemplative in our practice. It's really wonderful. So thank you for doing that and organizing so many amazing thinkers too, and synthesizing their words into your messaging too. I guess for me, I mean, I'm echoing what's already been said, the extreme isolation and the heaviness of the times that we live in. And like, you know, you called it the conspicuousness of the evilness in our systems. I'm having a hard time practicing joy these days. I'm like normally an optimist extraordinaire and always like look to the good of things, but lately I just haven't been able to find that much good.
Yes.
Every time I tune into the news, I feel like how extremely toxic the dialogue has become. And it's incredibly depressing to me, but then I feel terrible when I tune everything out because I do want to be like a tapped in, educated, engaged citizen, but at the same time, tapping in is very toxic to me. And also I'm doing, you know, I'm on the ground right now doing foreclosure and eviction defense work.
Mm.
And so I'm like in the trenches of seeing the economic impact and hardships of the poor leadership that we're living in right now. And there's just like there's no organization really to help everyday people in America that are deeply suffering all around you, entrenched in really messed up systems. Anyway, I don't know, I'm just having a hard time practicing joy because at the end of the day, I have like no emotional capacity and I just want to, I'm like somewhat numb, honestly.
Yes.
So I'm curious to hear what you think about like what are, I don't know, good, I don't know. Basically, I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know what I'm going to get from it, but it's just been very difficult because the extreme transitions that you have to go through between like your actual lived work day and then having to switch to like doing the contemplative practices that restore you to be able to go back to the practice. It's just been really tough these days. Yeah.
And I definitely feel you on that and empathize with that and have shared that issue. What I've found is, well, for me, I only try and take in about 1 hour of news a day, but sometimes that doesn't happen because so much of the news is involved with law and legal actions right now. So sometimes a day can be devoted to something, a news or something that's happened. And so I try and limit that, but I try and have my morning practices and do a midday practice of whatever, of just having some reflection on what is going on, calming down. I know that in my head, because it is kind of it's not in our heads, but just everything that's swirling around in the mind, I just ask for sight to be able to see so that I can divest myself of anything that may be blocking my ability to see, or to empty myself out so that something more full can come in. And I try and do that, especially with so much on email, and things can get lost in translation on email, and you're tempted to jump up and get mad and send a response or something and react. That is definitely a practice that I have, and talking to people, talking to people, not comparative suffering, but you know they know the hard times, and they give words not only of encouragement, but kindness and perspective. perspective, and I try and do that. And it comes from the strangest and the oddest places, just kind of like last night with the student. And it will come if I can just see it. And that's all I ask. Just let me see that. So I'm not in the way of myself, or yeah, don't get in the way of myself.
Nana, you're muted, but I see your lips moving.
I was just going to call on Duncan, who is next for a question, and then we have Nicole, and then we have Hillary after that. So go ahead, Duncan.
Yeah, well, I have lots of thoughts and feelings here, and I just wanted to appreciate sort of the overall tenderness and authenticity of the way it feels here. So I just appreciate that. But I would also say that part of my background is that I went to law school dutifully and then decided that wasn't really the path for me. And so I became a psychotherapist. And partly the reason for that is that my work is in connecting with other people and connecting with other people at an authentic level. And so I wanted to follow up on something that Peter asked about and that you responded, which was that what was so moving for you was the connection on the phone of this student saying, you saw me, right? And you being able to say, I see you. One of the commercials I'd like to say for the legal community is that contemplation is not necessarily an individual act. Everybody's focusing on mindfulness and sitting by yourself and calming down. We human beings are relational creatures. So we need to co-regulate one another. So it's in the meeting with one another. It's not in sitting by yourself. I used to have a pretty conscientious meditative practice. I don't anymore. Because what really gives me life is to connect with other people at a very real level. And that's the very thing that lawyers are not allowed to do, right? They're not allowed to have a subjective experience and to engage subjectively to the subjective experience of the client. They're supposed to be transactional and objectifying and commodifying and all that stuff. But that's the problem, right? That's the problem, is that we can't relate to one another as human beings.
Absolutely. I think that is such an insightful comment about relationship as a form of contemplation. I think that is so important, especially at this time when I'm really worried about loneliness among people and we're really isolated, and it's very difficult. But I think connecting, and we're trying to connect mainly through technology because that's just how it has to be for now. But I think that there are really authentic ways, just like here, that can happen. Yeah. Thank you.
I think next was Nicole.
Thank you, everyone. I think, so I'm a lawyer. I'm a collaborative family lawyer. So I don't litigate at all. However, I'm also an agent for the Office of the Children's Lawyer, which means I do go to court when I represent children. Either children have been apprehended, so they are in care, or if their parents are in the midst of a high conflict divorce, then I represent their interests in court with respect to that separation. And I think the most important thing that we have to do is understand who we are as a person, like get to the authentic self inside of us, and get rid of the labels and the shields that we think we have to wear as a lawyer, because we don't have to be that way. If that's not you, then you don't have to practice that way at all. And I call myself the transformational lawyer because I think we can transform as lawyers, and we can transform our clients and even the courts as lawyers. So a very quick example, I was in a trial. It was a very horrible, high conflict custody and access. There were 3 children. Each of them had special needs. The parents just didn't agree on anything. There was not one thing that they couldn't agree on. and I had to represent these children. And because I've got a very strong mindfulness practice, I've also got a very strong Buddhist philosophy. Well, I'm a Jubu because I'm Jewish with Buddhist philosophy. The one thing that I was really struggling with is that it says you should not do harm to people intentionally. And I knew that in this cross-examination that I was going to be doing, the father was going to be harmed very, very significantly because of what my client's instruction was. And I was really struggling because I knew he was going to be devastated. If he followed how my cross-examination was going to take him, he was going to be devastated and I was going to harm him. And I really struggled with how it conflicted with me and how I was a person. I spoke to my teacher and he said to me, well, you just have to apologize. If you can't get off the case and you can't do anything, you have to apologize. And I'm thinking, well, how do I apologize in court? So the first thing that I did is I went into my inner self before I started my cross-examination. And I was lucky a judge just accepted everything. And the first thing I did, I said to this father is, I want to apologize for any harm that I may cause you as a result of this cross-examination. This is not personal. I'm doing this on behalf of my clients. And if it causes you harm, I truly apologize. And do I have your permission to continue with my cross-examination? So I asked his permission and I apologized. And there was like just dead silence in the courtroom. And the judge looked at him and he nodded his head. And he allowed me to continue with my cross-examination. And it was a very respectful cross-examination. I gave the mother that asked her for the same permission, and I made that same apology. And that changed the entire course of how that actual trial went, because I had brought some kind of intention, conscious intention into the courtroom, and respect for everybody and understanding that no one was out to get. I didn't know this guy from bar of soap. He was a really, really nice guy. He actually was a good father. He's just his methodology in doing, he just didn't take the children's opinions into account. And that changed everything. And I think we have to get rid of this facade that we have of, if you're a lawyer, you have to practice this way. If you truly get in touch with who you are authentically, you can practice as a lawyer and do a great job doing it. And I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really powerful, very powerful, about the intention and bringing compassion and awareness to our practice, and not being a bull in a china shop or doing the traditional practice, as you will. So often, I mean, depositions are kind of like an art, of course, taking depositions, but so often people struggle with it, and students can struggle with it, but because it's so traumatic, it can be a terrible thing to do to someone, the deposition. Honestly, it can be abusive. I mean, all kind of things go on in there. And so it's important to bring that practice and that of consciousness and compassion to that. And I love the idea of you asking for forgiveness and permission. That's amazing. It's amazing. Thank you.
So Hillary was next with a question.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to say, Ms. Nicole, that really truly was beautiful.
Yeah.
It brought me to tears instantly. And it kind of segues into what I would like to bring up. I am still studying. I just started my GDL program, so I'm not a practicing lawyer. And I was always kind of turned off to going into law because I had more of like a revolutionary type mindset, like, why reform when we need to just rebuild entirely? Yet here I am. And so with that being said, I sometimes go back and forth between like a revolution and the art of doing nothing, like Taoism, and I'm just constantly like stuck going back and forth. And I was just wondering if there's anything that you could kind of.
I'm sorry, you trailed off a bit at the end. Just anything that I could recommend?
Oh yes, if you could just touch, or if anyone had anything to say on that, just the art of doing nothing. And because obviously all of you guys got into law to make a change, which I agree and find commendable. But I just get stuck between those two issues.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. And I don't think necessarily one negates the other. I think you can be in a contemplative state and then in an active state and then in an active state and then in contemplative state, very non-dual in that way. And I think kind of almost what I was talking about in this article, that this light and this energy, or however you want to call it, will well up inside of you when you take the time to do nothing, and you will act from that. And it will be a very powerful action and something you can feel good about too, and hopefully others feel good about as well. But I think I think you can do both actually, to be in a state of no thingness and then act in a revolutionary way. If that makes sense, I hope that does. I've enjoyed it. And if anyone else has any recommendations for Hillary. Yes, Peter.
Oh, I was going to say, Hillary, that Nicole's example combines the revolutionary with the practical, you might say, or being stuck in the reality that we have, because she, the way I hear what Nicole tried to do there was to manifest a presence in which she was recognizing the humanity of really everyone in the room that she was speaking to, including the person she was going to cross-examine. And so she kind of elevated into the situation a universal humanity that is not reflected in the hurly-burly of the world as it is so much, but that was brought into that very loaded courtroom scene in a way that could alter it. And that is a revolutionary moment, I think. It's a beautiful example of you know, and in a way, I don't know, Nicole, for you to do that, I wonder if you would agree with this. You have to know we're out here, you know, because you're about to do something that could be perceived as peculiar, wacky, overly psychological, inappropriate. But if you know that we're all here too, that you're one of many who are reinforcing each other to bring this consciousness into the world wherever we are, it's much easier to do it. It's the opposite of the normal situation that I find is so common, where you're trying to reach people if you dare to speak in a way that contradicts the apparent reality. If you feel everyone else's presence by memory from this phone call or from practices you engage in over time with others, then we have the strength to do it, to sort of make that revolutionary intervention. Whatever happens, in a way, whatever happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I know Amanda wanted to share something at this point.
Thank you. Jennifer, thank you so much for just creating the extraordinary space and presence that you have, because I can feel it even though we are not in the same room. And you spoke about creating space, and you have done that. Peter, thank you for that, what you've just shared about being one of many, because that is what I'm feeling right now. And Nicole, your story was amazing. And I just applaud the work you do and how you show up in the world. So much courage. In some ways, I feel like my job is easy, although it really isn't. But my job is to take what is happening now, what you're all sharing, to take this, the wisdom that is in this group, and to show lawyers that it exists, to carry this message so that they also know that they are one of many. And so I do that with law students, lawyers who are just beginning to find another way. and then also with lawyers who are far more advanced in their spiritual path. And I also, thought I was out there on a limb. I mean, who works in the intersection of spirituality and law? Like most people, if you try to explain that at a dinner party, they just think you mad. Or when I say my mission is to raise the consciousness of the legal profession, and I just get these like blank looks. But suddenly this year, I'm stepping into my power in a way I never have before and owning it all. And I don't care what people think. And it's been a gradual process, but really accelerated this year because it feels like there is absolutely no time to waste on bullshit and ego anymore. The world needs us to shine our light. We have to get over ourselves, do what we can to bring it in and shine it. And you have to get over whatever those obstacles are that are in your way. And so I came out publicly that I am a channel and medium as well as an ex-lawyer, and I do channeled readings for lawyers. And I mean, that's kind of such a bizarre thing. And I initially thought, I'm never going to put that on LinkedIn. Like, oh my God, maybe I'll just quietly tell a few people. But now I've put it out there because it's through this community, and I've started, through Kim Wright, who's my friend and mentor, and Lawyers as Peacemakers, that I've had the confidence to say, this is what I do. And what's happening in the readings I've done for lawyers when they write back and say, you've changed my whole life, like that. And I go, it's not me. All I did was receive this message for you that's helping you find the confidence or get over whatever it is, that the obstacle that's in your way. And so I really feel so strongly that it's a time to come out and shine our light. And the contemplative practice is necessary so that we are absorbing light. Because if we don't have enough within us, obviously that's when we burn out. And this weekend I was able to just shine that light and speak to students about all the changes in the profession. And I read chapters, some pages from Glennon Doyle's book about, I can feel everything and survive. I can use pain to become. Because as lawyers, we don't feel. And that's, I've studied integral theory. We're completely cut off from our feelings. So just to be able to share these things with lawyers and see them awaken before my eyes. When I got these feedback Sunday night, I'd been home for 30 minutes from my weekend. I was exhausted. I took my husband to the emergency room 30 minutes later. And then I finally got home and fed the kid. And, at 10 p.m., the messages from the students were coming. And I just sat next to my bed and I wept. I wept and wept. And they were just like, thank you. You've changed my life. This was the best experience. These are law students from very poor backgrounds. And so, yeah, there's so much light we can bring, but we have to support each other, and we have to stop doing long enough. And that speaks to what Hillary said, so that we are centered and grounded and have the light in us. Because if we just do, we just empty ourselves out. So that balance of being and doing is so important. But I feel like radiant with joy, hope, and possibility. And I want to channel a message for this whole group of whatever your guides have to say about what we're here to do in the world. And I will do that with pleasure if it helps me shine this light and then further and further into the world. Thank you.
Thank you. That's amazing. And thank you for cultivating the light in our profession. There's so many amazing people here, and it has made me joyful and proud, to be quite frank, that all of you are out there, and certainly Amanda and Nicole and all of you. I really appreciate it. I appreciate those comments, and thank you for being courageous and not listening to the negative or negating voices about that. That's so important.
Thank you, Jennifer. And, Jennifer, we had a question posed by Elaine, whether you might be able to share meditative practice with the sun that you spoke of in the magazine. Is that something you'd like to do before we have final words and card, or do you want to just do that over email? Or
yes, I put it in the chat. I can put it in the email too, or in email, not the email.
Put it.
Yes.
Jennifer, I can just say really briefly, because I did want to also thank you, because I so appreciate listening to you there. I'm not sure we've ever seen each other on camera, but we've spoken a couple of times.
Yes.
And we've emailed back and forth several times, and it's always, so good to connect with you. And I just so enjoyed that talk and feel very full of light too. And it just reminded me, because it was speaking of practices, and we had an exchange about how you sometimes go to the coast, and you know the sun gives you a lot of
it does,
obviously, light and energy. And I mean, you know, these practices I think are so relevant and they're important, and I also use practices like that. So I think you know, if we can share these with each other too, it can give us tremendous resource.
Absolutely. Thank you. And it's been a pleasure. And thank you for the Conscious Lawyer. It has been an anchor. I mean, I was just searching, as with Pie's Laugh, because I was just searching and searching years ago about what's out there for people who think like me. Are there people who think like me, or are they? And thank you. I don't know if we want to read this. Is this is the end, Nat?
Yeah, I was just going to wrap up. Say a couple words, but is there something you wanted to? Oh, you wanted to read? No.
Oh no, we don't have to read it at all. But it is in the magazine. But we can. I think Peter is talking. Oh, you said read it. Okay.
Please read it. That's what I was saying.
Okay. Okay. Benevolent universe, the very breath and grounded being to all life, blind and emblazon us in a fire. Let us speak and act from this light, inextinguishable. You are, and so shall I be, and so it is. I didn't understand that. Thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you.
Jennifer, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who shared, and for Jennifer for laying the foundation for us to be able to do that today.
Yes, thank you. It's great to see all of you. I hope to see you soon.